is so important to expressive trombone playing. That was the theme for Tommy Dorsey. He was a trombone legend in the jazz era, and he was known for his really beautiful vibrato. However, to hear that kind of vibrato in the 21st century, it sounds a little outdated. It's very fast and very wide. So it's a good indication that to use vibrato means applying the kind of vibrato, the style of the vibrato, the profile of vibrato that's appropriate to the musical situation. So unless I'm playing I'm Getting Sentimental Over You, which is Tommy Dorsey's theme song, or something like it or from that era, I'm not likely to use that profile of vibrato. Now let's talk about how to do vibrato, because you have two choices. You can do slide vibrato, which is what I just did, or you can do embouchure or jaw vibrato. Those are the same thing. You create that vibrato by moving your jaw, and we'll talk about how to do this. You'll notice that I said you have two ways to create vibrato. I left out number 3, which is what some people refer to as diaphragm vibrato, and that's where you puff the air to make vibrato. I don't think you should ever puff the air, because the air is your gasoline. And when you get that air moving, the key to trombone playing on all levels is that constant, steady stream of air and good foundation to let the air drive all of your other technique. So I do not advocate going in there and playing with your air to create vibrato. I think it's a terrible idea. It might work really well on the flute, but on the trombone, I would not recommend it. So that leaves two choices: jaw vibrato or slide vibrato. Of these two, jaw vibrato is much easier. So I always start my students with jaw vibrato. And if we get to it later, we'll talk about slide vibrato. You shouldn't do either kind until you can get a beautiful tone in every register of the instrument reliably. You should never use vibrato to cover up a poor tone or some other part of your technique that's lacking. So vibrato comes later. It's a very important part of being expressive, but I don't allow my students to use it until they're genuinely ready. Once you are ready, a good vibrato is essential to sounding mature and being expressive. So here's how you do it. It's real easy, actually, assuming you have a good foundation and you can hold a note in tune and with a good tone over the course of, a few bars. Just say M-A-W, ma, 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 and that's going to move your chin up and down. And when I do that in play, here's what it sounds like. So I can play with the profile of that vibrato. I can make it faster, or I can make it wider. It has these two dimensions that you can play with. And so I'll try another one that I'll make it maybe a little wider or faster or whatever, and you'll hear the difference. The profile of the vibrato should match the musical situation. So as I mentioned with Tommy Dorsey, his vibrato was spectacular for that style. Here's an excerpt from a piece by Bozza, a French composer. It's called Ballade. And in this style of music, we want a very shimmery, sort of fast vibrato, but it's still subtle. You don't want it to be too wide. Let me play a phrase or two for you with this style of vibrato. I didn't use vibrato on every note. I used it where I felt it, you know, and when I did use it, you could really tell that it was there. The other thing to realize is that the vibrato does not always affect the dynamic. Sometimes I'll have students who will apply vibrato and immediately diminuendo. Well, you shouldn't assume that. It really depends, once again, on the context. Later in this piece, this Bozza Ballade, there is a section where it works really well to use slide vibrato, actually. And so I am not opposed to combining the two different styles of vibrato in the same piece of music. So it really, once again, it depends on the phrase that you're playing and the emotion that you're trying to portray. Now let's talk just a little bit about slide vibrato, which I feel is more awkward to make it sound good than the jaw vibrato. When you use slide vibrato, you're going to use primarily wrist, but I actually use what I call forearm rotation, which is this movement. I feel like my thumb is rotating around my pinky, and there's a little bit of that going on. Now, the mechanics of how you're holding your slide will really dictate whether or not you can do this forearm rotation. So if it's not working for you, you don't have to use it. You can use a combination of wrist and fingers or whatever works for you. But generally speaking, you want to go both above and below the pitch. Because if you just go below, well, obviously that'll make the pitch sound flat. And so you want to go both above and below. Now this would seem to indicate that you should not use it in first position, but you just saw me do that. So I'm contradicting myself a little bit here. However, I don't mind using it in first so long as it's shallow enough that it doesn't bring the pitch down. So you have to be really careful, but it can be done. And when you're not in first, you have freedom to go both above and below the pitch. A lot of jazz music really calls for slide vibrato, but that doesn't mean you can't use it on the classical side. You just have to use it judiciously, and you have to be careful about its parameters. You can't use, a big Tommy Dorsey slide vibrato, generally speaking. So learn jaw vibrato first, only after you can get a really good tone in every register.